The shed had stood at the edge of the property for more than 30 years. It wasn't locked, simply because no one ever went inside. The boards were darkened by time, the hinges creaked as if warning anyone who approached it was better not to linger here. The man bought the house in Texas almost by accident. The price was too good to ask too many questions. The shed came as is, like an old problem no one wanted to remember. For the first few months, he didn't even look inside. There were more important things to deal with: repairs, paperwork, work. The shed existed in the background like a shadow, until one particularly hot day when he needed a place to store an old refrigerator. He opened the door without expectations. The smell of dust, dry wood, and machine oil hit him immediately. Inside it was dark, but something deep inside reflected the light. He turned on a flashlight and froze. Along the wall stood heavy metal machines, not rusty, not abandoned, just forgotten. Levers, guides, fine thread screws, everything looked as if it had been used carefully, almost respectfully. On one of the machines, a piece of leather was still clamped in place, dried by time, but perfectly aligned along the edge. He wasn't a leather worker, but instinctively he knew these weren't ordinary tools. He had seen modern equivalents, bulky, loud, designed for speed. These were different. They were built for precision, for the hand, for someone who could feel the material. On the floor stood a box of parts labeled in pencil. Nearby, a stack of drawings covered in small, neat handwriting. No brands, no logos, only dates. The earliest one read 1978. He closed the shed and walked away. But the thought wouldn't let go. Someone had spent years building this, and why had it all been left behind? The next day, he returned with a camera. He photographed every joint, every mechanism, every marking. That evening, he began searching for information, with almost no hope, and almost immediately, he ran into silence. These machines didn't exist in catalogs. They weren't sold commercially. There were no forums dedicated to them, only rare mentions and comments under old videos where people wrote, "They don't make them like this anymore." That's when he asked the question people rarely ask: who actually needs this level of precision? The answer didn't come right away. First, messages with one craftsman, then another. They asked strange questions. What was the thread pitch? How did the edge behave when bent? Did it leave marks on a second pass? He sent videos, close-ups, slow movements of the lever. The replies grew shorter, the tone more cautious. One craftsman wrote, "If it works the way you're showing, don't sell it to the first buyer." That was the moment he understood. This wasn't about selling the machines. It was about access to them. He began testing, cutting leather slowly, repeating motions that seemed already built into the mechanism itself. The results were consistent, clean edges, even thickness. No modern tool he tried for comparison offered that level of control. Requests started arriving carefully. Could I try it? Is it possible to work for a day? Do you rent this out? People traveled from far away. They watched in silence. They tried, and they understood. He didn't name a price. He simply limited access, and the more limited the access became, the higher the value rose. By the end of the month, it was clear the shed was no longer just a shed. It had become a bottleneck through which deadlines, orders, and reputations passed, and all of it without advertising, without a sign, without promises. But he wasn't really making money yet. Not yet. For weeks, the shed existed in a strange in-between state. It wasn't a business. It wasn't a hobby. It was something people whispered about quietly, usually at the end of a conversation. Those who had been inside didn't talk much. They didn't post photos. They didn't explain. They simply asked one careful question before leaving: when could I come back? At first, he avoided answering directly, not because he was hiding something, but because he didn't yet understand what he was protecting. He kept a notebook, not unlike the ones he'd found in the shed, and wrote down names, dates, and short observations. Who stayed longer, who rushed, who treated the machines like tools, and who treated them like shortcuts. Patterns began to emerge. One afternoon, a leatherworker drove 6 hours just to spend 30 minutes inside. He didn't ask to use the machines right away. He walked around them slowly, touching the frames, listening to the sound of the levers. When he finally worked, he didn't try to go fast, he tried to go clean. When he finished, he rolled the leather carefully and said something that stayed with him. "I could build my entire line on this edge." That sentence changed the way the shed felt. Until then, he had thought in terms of hours, time spent, wear and tear risk. But this wasn't about renting equipment. It was about enabling outcomes that couldn't be replicated elsewhere. Precision wasn't the product, consistency was. That realization led to an uncomfortable choice. If he allowed unlimited access, the machines would become ordinary. If he charged too little, the wrong people would come, rushing, pushing, ignoring limits. And if he tried to scale too quickly, the shed would lose the very thing that made it valuable. So he did something that felt almost unreasonable. He stopped offering time. Instead, he offered results. Access was no longer measured in hours or days. It was tied to a specific outcome, a finished batch, a defined edge, a repeatable process. The price wasn't written anywhere. It was explained quietly, face to face, high enough to make people pause, low enough to make them think. The first person to agree didn't negotiate. He nodded once and asked when to start. That payment didn't feel like income. It felt like a test, a confirmation that the value was real, not imagined. The money covered maintenance, small upgrades, and nothing more. But something shifted, the conversation changed. People stopped asking if they could come. They asked whether there was availability. With that shift came pressure, expectations rose, mistakes mattered more. Every decision carried weight. There were days he considered returning the money and closing the shed again, but instead he adjusted the rules. Fewer clients, clearer boundaries, no exceptions. By the end of the season, there were no surprises. The notebook told the story clearly. Fewer sessions, higher quality, repeat work, quiet referrals. The shed wasn't busy and it was precise. The first real monetary decision hadn't been about pricing, it had been about restraint. And once that decision was made, everything that followed became inevitable. Once the rules were set, the shed changed its rhythm. There were no longer unexpected visits or rushed requests. People learned to wait. Some waited weeks, others left and came back months later. Not everyone was accepted, and those who were understood that access was not guaranteed. It had to be earned through patience and respect for the process. The man noticed something subtle but important. The fewer sessions he allowed, the more prepared people became. They arrived with clearer plans, better materials, and realistic expectations. Mistakes decreased, output improved. The machines were no longer teaching technique, they were amplifying it. Word spread quietly, not through ads or posts, but through finished work. Clean edges appeared in places they hadn't before. Products lasted longer, customers noticed, and when they asked how it was done, the answer was always indirect. A place in Texas, an old setup. You can't just show up. The shed became part of a supply chain without ever trying to be. Deadlines were built around its availability. Designs were simplified to match its strengths. And without intending to, the man had created a filter, separating those who chased speed from those who valued control. Income followed the structure. Payments were predictable. Sessions were spaced. The work no longer drained him. There were weeks when nothing happened, and that was by design. The system held. Even under pressure, he didn't expand, he didn't upgrade, he maintained, and that decision kept everything intact. By the time he added up the numbers, the season was already over. No single payment had felt large. There were no dramatic moments, no sudden jumps, just a steady accumulation that mirrored the work itself. The total surprised him anyway, around $36,000, earned quietly, without advertising, without employees, without changing his life. The shed remained a shed. The machines stayed where they were. Nothing about the outside had changed, but something fundamental had. He understood now. that the real asset wasn't what he had found, it was what he had not tried to turn it into. He didn't scale it, he didn't modernize it, he didn't chase demand, he protected the conditions that made it work. When people asked if he planned to grow, he shook his head. Growth would have required compromise, and compromise would have destroyed the precision everyone came for. The shed continued to open only when it made sense. The machines continued to do what they had always done, and the system continued to reward restraint. Sometimes the most profitable decision isn't to expand, it's to leave things exactly where they are.